Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I am Tahir Dhindsa and you are watching SDTV. Conference of Parties, 27th conference is just coming in a few days in Sharm el-Sheikh. And this time it's a loaded agenda which would be discussed there, and the experts are looking forward to have some solutions to this horrible impacts of climate change and some mitigation and adaptation and other things. In Paris, the agreement had reached. It was very famous. President Barack Obama personally attended that, and other head of states as well. There it was decided that they would spare 100 billion US dollars and another 100 billion from other sources as well. The promise has not been met, it is said. And now they say that if something is not done quickly, the global warming might reach 2 degrees, which would be a tipping point. We have today with us one of the very important secretary of the USCCC, deputy head of the USCCC, and an important environmentalist and ambassador, Shafqat Kakakheil sir. Kakakheil sir, very warm welcome.
Great pleasure.
What do you say as a preamble or just as a premise to this conference which is going on?
Well, climate change has indeed become, as the UN Secretary General said, the defining challenge facing humankind. In 1992, the world community met in Rio, in Brazil, and negotiated a framework convention or agreement on climate change. It's called United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, or UNCCC. In 2015, there was another historic conference in Paris where the Paris Agreement on Climate Change was adopted, which basically operationalized the principles which were contained in the 1992 convention. It was decided right from 1984, when the first COP was held, that the problem of climate change was too important to be handled by biennial conferences. So we should have every year a climate conference. If you look at biodiversity, which is extremely important, the Biodiversity Convention meets every second year. But climate change conference, or COP, Conference of Parties, of both the Convention 1992 and the Paris Agreement, are held every year. Normally it is November, December. Last year in Glasgow was 26th COP, and now in Sharm el-Sheikh it's the 27th. It normally is held in either November or December, and in the middle of the year there is a meeting of senior officials, normally in Bonn. The headquarters of the convention and the agreement is located in Bonn. So what we are seeing is the 27th COP. The importance of this COP is due to a number of reasons. First is the international community, it took several COPs to translate the Paris Agreement, the rules and regulations, and it was called the Rules Book. The Rule Book was finalized in Glasgow. So now, the Rule Book, now the challenge is to do the substantial work. Now the first challenge is that the emissions, global emissions, by developing and developed countries have grown. Under the convention, the developed countries were supposed to drastically and sharply reduce their emissions. They have not done so. And a number of developing countries, such as China, still considers itself a developing country. India is now the third polluter or producer of emissions, about between 6 and 8%. China is 25%, United States 15%, European Union about the same. So that is one thing, that the problem and the failure of the international community to reduce the emissions has brought forward the date of the full impacts of climate change.
Right.
So we've had hundreds of events last year and this year. This year you had droughts in Germany, you had floods in Germany, you had a terrible drought in China, which dried up lakes and rivers, including the mighty Yangtze River, on which you have a massive Three Gorges dam. The other problem is the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which has had a number of negative impacts because the European countries, on their own and on the advice of the United States, denounced the what they call the aggression, the military ingress in Ukraine. Now, Ukraine and Russia together are the major producers of energy for Europe. Russia is one of the principal sources
of supply
of gas and also oil. And it was thanks to the supply of Russian gas that Europeans were able to slowly reduce their coal, the use of coal. Germany started with 65-70%, brought it down to 35%. Now, Germany is going back to coal or going slow on replacing coal. They might also revisit their decision on nuclear question.
Right. So that is the backdrop with some
The backdrop is a huge increase in the number of extreme events and negative political development.
Right. So what are the tangibles? I mean, the leaders, the global leaders would be, I mean, what are those things that if they come as a result, they achieve they agree and they goes forward, they would say, oh, these were the tangible and we have achieved them.
Yes, in Sharm el-Sheikh, what the leaders have to do, what the governments have to do, they were in Glasgow, it was decided that all countries of the world will revisit their commitments on reducing emissions. These are contained in national communications called Nationally Determined Contribution, NDC. So far, only 24 countries have done that. Pakistan did it last year. They will have to about 6 countries more are expected, but the challenge is to basically make both developing and developed countries. But developed countries are responsible for 80% of the historic emissions. They have to announce, they have to be willing to drastically reduce their emissions, and they don't seem willing because politically, all governments work on the basis of how long, when is the next general election. Nobody wants to do things because if you want to reduce emissions. You have to tax the use of gas. You have to close down coal, plants, and take politically unpopular decisions. So, for developing countries and for the climate, the most important thing is how to convince governments to make sacrifices today in the interest of even this current generation, but more so for their children and grandchildren.
Right.
Secondly, the problem of developing countries. Now, you have the problem of developed countries plus developing countries, but more so for developed countries because they are responsible for the emissions which created the problem. Developing countries are suffering the effects like we had the monstrous monsoons. Here people are talking about $30 to $40 billion. Simultaneously with the floods, while the flood waters had not receded in Sindh, you had floods in Florida. And the insurance claims have gone up to $62 billion.
Oof.
But the American economy has the money. The Pakistani economy does not have the money. So developing countries, complaint is that in 2009, President Obama and the re-elected president of Brazil, Lula, and the Chinese leaders, they all negotiated a program called Copenhagen Accord, under which developed countries had agreed to jointly mobilize $100 billion annually, not one time, annually, for helping developing countries. Now, what is the track record? The track record, 2019, they contributed 79 billion, 79.5. In 2020, for which figures are available, it's 83.3 billion. So you still have a gap. Also, the climate groups are saying that it all depends on who is counting. The developed countries are counting any project that they think will help climate resilience and call it part of their contribution to the 100 billion. So that is a major question, how to convince the developed countries to pay up. In the finance question, there are a number of issues, not only the quantity, the amount of money, but also where is it coming from. Rich countries are saying, look, when our industry invests in developing countries, that is also contribution when they set up renewable energy. But renewable energy is always promoted against profit margin. Developing countries are saying, look, all the monies, the 100 billion, must come from public sources and not from private sector. There must be grants. They are providing 62% of the monies provided to LDCs were in the form of soft loans. LDCs
cannot pay, yeah.
Exactly. So the main question is the willingness to reduce emissions and the willingness to support poor countries, first to overcome the effects of climate change, like Pakistani floods. Also, there are droughts in Africa. And
so are you saying that the main question is that is the developed world is willing to shoulder the financing burden to salvage the humanity from this situation or not? This is the main question.
This is the big question, and the other big question is that they themselves have to be
reduce emissions.
Absolutely.
What will become, I mean, that's a question on tangent, but that bothers me a lot, and I often, what will become of the oil business? Because we have seen that President Biden personally visited Saudi Arabia to increase production by 1 million barrel, and they did not, because they are clubbed up with Russia on a OPEC plus for better profits, and they want to increase oil, to reduce prices, meaning by to encourage more use of oil and diesel and gasoline, because the election in US is coming, and the princess said that I'm not going to increase that. I want to retain good price for my own country. And you are asking us just because you are facing election in the US and we cannot support you for leaders. And so what do you see? What will become of the oil and the petrodollars and all?
Well, the main worry is if you look at the oil-producing countries. Saudi Arabia is going for massive programs of renewable energy. So is UAE. UAE is also hosting the International Renewable Energy Agency, ARENA, which produced an excellent report on the renewable energy potential in Pakistan. My worry is that what if the oil-producing countries are able to diversify? Where will developing countries go? Because they need oil, they need gas for running their power stations, for running their factories, and also for overcoming weather conditions. So this is a big question, and everybody is hoping that the renewables revolution will make oil redundant, and then even the oil-rich countries will be able to adjust their economies. Oil has two broad uses. One is you burn oil and gas to generate energy. The other is the other uses of oil. Oil is used in thousands of products.
Yeah, and plastic and petrochemical.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So the Arab countries and Latin American countries which produce oil, Russia and all, they are hopeful that oil will remain a useful and
on the prices.
Valuable.
So are you suggesting towards the fag end of this interview, because of the shortage of the time, although it's very interesting, are you suggesting that whatever the developed countries should make for themselves for whatever circumstances, somehow the needs and scarcities of the developing worlds should be looked after, and that too by the developed worlds, especially like oils? When they were developing, they were using oil and coal ruthlessly. And now when these developing countries are developing, they say that you reduce emission, or there should be some compensation mechanism for that. Are you saying that?
Yes, I'm saying that developed countries should fulfill both their commitments.
Right.
Reduce their emissions as well as support developing countries. But developing countries are also not angels.
Yeah, they're not.
Developing countries must adopt policies and set up institutions which can offer incentives. What if one of the suspicions, one of the deeply held beliefs or worries in the OECD countries is that we have given aid for the past 75 years or more. And where has it gone? It has gone into the pockets of the kleptocrats, the corrupt leaders of the developing world.
Right.
And so developing countries must establish the high standards of integrity and also set up institutions. Nobody gives you money without you explaining what this money will be spent on.
Last question quickly. Just give us one thing, two things, or at the most three, that these are the tangible indicators of that the progress is made in in this COP conference.
Firm commitments
on the
two issues of emission reduction as well as
Financing.
support to finance. Next year, in any case, in Dubai or Abu Dhabi, COP28 will be in UAE. They will discuss a new financial goal
Right.
because the 100 billion was fixed in 2009.
That's too small.
That was long ago. And
long.
if you use the normal principles of inflation, the 100 billion has become worth 50 billion. So these are the two things.
Right.
Reduce your commitment, support the poor countries, small island countries, least developed countries, vulnerable countries to live, to survive the effects of climate change.
Thank you very much for participating and giving this valuable time. So the bottom line is that it's a huge challenge and it's a tall order. And it would be some sort of a miracle if this happened, because you are asking the rich to spare money and support the poor. And we have rarely seen that in the history. Marshall plans where the political ambitions were there, all that was one thing. But that's a global agenda and it's a human agenda now. Let's see what happened with this. We come to the end of the program. Goodbye till next time.